Alright, people, how are we doing today? Ready to find out whether or not Macron's presidency has been a huge dumpster fire? We're about to find out. So, according to Rupley, we're coming up shortly to the midpoint in the presidential term of France's Emmanuel Macron. How should we assess his time in office? Has it been an epic fail? Or like the proverbial curate's egg, good and bad in parts? He's the president the neoliberal globalists love. But who the man and women in the streets seem less keen on? Gillette-Wanez street protests have taken place in France every weekend for the past 11 months. But you never know about them if you only watch establishment-friendly media. While images of pro-democracy Hong Kong protests taking place thousands of miles away, making the headlines in Western Europe, pro-democracy protests down the road or across the channel in Macron's France are ignored, at least they have been up to now. Gillette-Wanez. I'm probably making that sound more Spanish than French. Translates to yellow vests. And I actually covered them several months ago, all the way back, I think, quite some time ago regardless. I cover all kinds of things that are unfriendly to the mainstream media. I mean, this is a channel that's all about truth, and talking about stuff that no one else wants to cover. Plain and simple. Trust me, it does occasionally cause some very noticeable amount of mental anguish to think about this stuff. Very unpleasant, but nothing I can't handle. So don't go woe is me, because I'm not saying woe is me. But the task of Macron, a former investment banker, was to complete the transfer of the French economy over to global capital. To do to France what Margaret Thatcher did to Britain 30 years ago. He's purchased privatization both as a way of cutting the budget deficit, but also to raise money for a new €10 billion touchy-feely innovation fund. The trouble is the numbers just don't add up. Despite fierce public opposition, he seems hell-bent on selling off the French state's majority stake in airport operator group ADP. But ADP is profitable. It owns airports outside of France too, and is in fact the world's #1 in airport management. It returns a good income to the state, which helps reduce the deficit. So why on earth sell? It makes no sense unless you realize what the agenda is. To prove the point, one of Macron's first targets was France's excellent state-owned railway, SNCF. Well, he said he didn't want to privatize it, and SNCF will be transformed into a joint stock company and will lose its monopoly on domestic routes next year. Next month, France's national lottery is set to be privatized, and Macron also wants to sell public stakes in a number of firms. He's moving France towards a globalized economy. He wants to create a platform for a global one-world currency, or at least a one-Europe currency. No, totally. The EU isn't a globalist organization that wants a one-world nation. No, of course not. They don't want a supercontinental superstate, which would eventually evolve into a Big Brother style scenario. They think that the globalists think they're going to make a Star Trek future. They're going to make more like a StarCraft future, where the United Earth Directorate sweeps over the entire Earth and basically says, join the Directorate, capitulate or die. You know, if you don't follow the United Earth Directorate's agenda, you're the enemy. And you have the choice of either being executed or launched out into space as colonists. And then you can end up sharing the Caprulu sector with the Protoss. And that's what it'll be. The globalist union will be like join or die. Like literally join or die. You can either join us or we're going to wipe you out. We're going to ruin you. We're going to force you to join. Oh, what's that? You say that's fear-mongering? Well, let's keep reading and find out what's all in his agenda. His international policy has generally mirrored his domestic agenda. He railed this week against the Turkish offensive in northern Syria. But Macron has been bombing Syria too. In April 2018, lest we forget, France took part in missile strikes in Syria before an alleged chemical weapons attack in Douma could be independently verified. He recently attacked Turkey for a decline in the rule of law in the country, yet in France, Gillette-Wanez demonstrators have regularly been subject to sometimes quite appalling treatment by the authorities. Some protests have been banned and there have been scores of arrests. Shouldn't Macron be concerned with the decline of the rule of law in his own country before castigating others? Ironically and quite tellingly, the one good thing Macron has done in international affairs is the one thing that brought him the most criticism from those who have supported him in other areas, namely his attempts to improve European relations with Russia. On August 27th, Macron stated the European continent will never be stable, will never be insecurity if we don't pacify and clarify our relations with Russia. The French president has been the prime mover in new moves towards détente with Moscow, and for that he deserves credit, even if some quite legitimately would question his motives. His motives made to get Russia to come and join the EU, because it's more than just a financial alliance. They're literally becoming a continental spanning group that will be ruled from Brussels. It will be a superstate. But his rapprochement with the Kremlin has alarmed all the usual suspects. "Oh, Russia, Macron is mistaken," declared an op-ed on the British Chatham House website. Macron's pivot to Russia sparks EU unease. The Financial Times wrote a VOA report entitled "Macron's Courtship of Putin, Alarming Russia's Near Neighbors," said British officials thought Macron's efforts to rebuild bridges with Moscow were premature. Forget the Gilets Jaunes, the civil unrest, the rubber bullets, the tear gas, the tax cuts to big business and the very rich, the privatizations, the confrontation with the trade unions, the erosion of workers' rights. The first serious criticism Macron has received internationally in the first 2.5 years of his presidency came when he simply pointed out that Europe needs better relations with Russia. Doesn't that tell us everything? Well, yes. Yes and no. Here's a criticism I have for Macron that's a little more to the point. He doesn't represent the French people. He represents himself and Brussels. He represents an experiment in smaller scale globalism, continentalism. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll probably try and find a way to make that term more palatable. He has not represented the people. He has allowed the police to abuse them. He has encouraged the police to abuse them. He ignores their demands. He does not recognize their rights. He represents his philosophy first and foremost, and everything else after that is just secondary. He is not a man of the people. He is a man of politics. He does not care about you. He's literally going to sell the French people lock, stock, and barrel to Brussels. And he's going to drag you people kicking and screaming the entire way. As far as I'm concerned, you guys should probably just go ahead and do with the EU what America did with King George. Down with the tyrant. And I know some people out there are going to say I'm inciting rebellion. Well, who knows? Maybe I am. Maybe that's a good thing. Fuck the EU. Fuck globalism. Because globalism is just going to add to a worldwide Big Brother state. Because in order to manage a government that size, you're going to need a lot of legislation, a lot of political power. And that is going to feed right into the little egos of the politicians. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that politicians love authoritarianism most of all. And every great crime in human history has been done by authoritarians. Nazi Holocaust? Authoritarian. There's a really great example right there. So then you should understand why I despise globalism. It's inevitably going to lead to an authoritarian power. Because you can't have a single world government without authoritarianism to manage that much space on that scale. You're going to need a lot of influence and a lot of infrastructure. I don't know. Prove me wrong. Anyway, that's about all. Peace.